Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. Really
you.
Nice. So I actually first found out about you through, oh my God, why is his name slipping me now? Canadian guy, bomb thrower. What's his name? Oh my God.
Bomb thrower?
That's his newsletter. It's called Bomb Thrower. Oh my God, I've forgotten his name. Why is that good? Oh my God. Mark Jeftovich. That's it. Sorry.
Yeah.
God, sorry, Mark, for forgetting your name. But he was the one that he posted your book online, I think, on Twitter.
Yeah, that would have been after Miami 2022, probably.
Yeah, I think he posted it even a bit more recently than that, because I only met him in 2023, Miami 2023. Okay. So that's when I started following him. And I remember him posting this book and I thought, oh gosh, this is really great. And isn't it great that she's like, giving this book out? And yeah, I was just really fascinated by the work that you did. And then last year, I dialed into D++'s white paper reading on Thanksgiving, which was awesome. And you were on and you were discussing a whole bunch of the technical aspects. That was a Twitter Spaces, I think.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And I was just fascinated by the whole thing. And I was like, this person's so interesting. She's got such interesting knowledge about the Bitcoin ecosystem and quite technical as well. So that's always nice. But your book, just for anyone listening, is called The Simplest Bitcoin Book. So we will have an image ever written.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a comprehensive guide, I guess, for, really, I would say actually beginners who just want to kind of really understand Bitcoin and go through things step by step. So I'd love to know a little bit about your Bitcoin journey, how you discovered it and what led you to write the book in the first place.
Okay, sure. And just to sort of make I don't know if caveats or a disclaimer, I'm not very technical at all. I do remember that space. And there are certain, I'm sort of, like I have zero technical background. I've learned a lot of things since diving down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. But during that space, there were just some things that I happened, like certain details that were fascinating that I happened to have learned. And so I brought them up because I was interested and wanted to hear D++'s take on them. But just to let people know, I don't want anybody to think like I have zero programming experience or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's a bit on a spectrum. It's relative, because people that feel they have no technical knowledge think if you understand Bitcoin remotely, you're highly technical. But
exactly.
We're all somewhere on the continuum, and people who are further down the line seem like huge experts to us. So I'd probably put myself in that bucket versus you.
Yeah, no, that's so true. It's funny if I'm reading Twitter or Nostr or on Spaces, I feel like a kindergartner, and then if I'm in my normal life and talking to a friend about Bitcoin, I feel like I'm a PhD. So yeah.
So you're Satoshi. I knew it.
Yeah. Oh my, what a! I watched that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I just did. At first I wasn't going to, and then I'm like, oh, it'll be fun at the least.
I guess I don't even have any of those subscriptions. I subscribed to Netflix recently for just 1 month because I wanted to watch Emily in Paris and the latest Bridgerton, and I watched them, and then I just cancelled the subscription because I was like, I was scrolling through their catalog and I'm like, there is nothing in here I want to watch.
Yeah.
Like nothing. So.
I literally did that for this, and I cancelled it today. And then, of course, they're like, "Oh, but we don't want you to leave. Here, we'll give it to you for half price." I'm like, "No, thank you." But I still get a month, so I'll see if there's anything on there. But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting because there was so little that I didn't know. Having been so avidly following and deep into this ecosystem for so long, you learn a lot of stuff. So. Yeah.
When did Bitcoin first pique your interest then? So how did you discover it even?
So it was early. Well, it's funny because initially someone told me about it in 2013 or 2012. And I have a recollection of sitting on my living room floor with my laptop open because I trusted this person a lot, but I wasn't real close with them. They were just sort of an acquaintance. So, but I thought, okay, well, let me look at it. And I delved in, and I sadly did not come upon Andreas Antonopoulos, or I might have stuck around. But everything I found was like Greek to me. I mean, even harder than that. I had no idea what I was reading. Like the words were not computing in my brain. And I tend to be able to figure things out in life. So I was kind of fascinated by that fact, but I was also just completely overwhelmed. And I said, okay, no, I don't know what this is. This is weird. And I'm not, I just didn't understand it. I had to just let it go. And so then 2017, early, someone very close to me mentioned it again. And I thought, okay, I guess, wow, this thing's still here, you know, huh? And I still didn't know what it was. And so I looked into it, and it was pretty fast from there, because by then, you know, there was already a decent amount of information out there. And as soon as I understood that it was about separating money from state, I was all 2 feet in. I'm like, this is it. You know, I realized that it was the solution to a problem I'd been searching for my whole life, in a sense. And I guess, having been born and raised in a country with incredible disparity in many areas, I was very upset by that as a very young child, and I couldn't understand it, and I was very disturbed. And then, you know, over the years, I got involved in different things here and there, a little bit of the community currency type thing, alternative currencies, just trying to figure out, you know, how, like, I didn't understand about central banking. I didn't know what fiat was. I didn't understand about the gold standard. You know, it wasn't any of that. It was more just this intuitive, and anybody who kind of looks around kind of sense of something is really wrong. You know, something's really wrong. And, you know, like I said, at some point I kind of figured out, well, there is something wrong with the money, but I didn't understand what. Anyway, and then I even started one of the alternative currencies where I was living at one point, that was sort of internet based. It was more a sort of a tracking system of people do kind of favors for people, but you can put an amount of value on them, and it all gets kept on a sort of grand spreadsheet thing. But I realized that very quickly. I had a couple of meetings with my local community. I was quite excited by it. But then I realized pretty soon after that it was going to really be on me, my shoulders. Like, people were not, they were like, oh, this is cool, you know, and kind of joined and kind of did a couple things, but no one was just diving in. And I just didn't have the time to sort of take it on and drive that project. So I sort of remained confused about how the whole thing was going to get solved. And yeah, so when I realized this is it, I was very happy. And I just, what's that?
I was just going to ask, were you instantly convinced specifically about Bitcoin that it solved that problem?
Yes, and I was, but I wouldn't say yes and no. I did understand that Bitcoin was profound, but that's not to say I didn't do any shitcoining. You know, I did a little.
Oh, I lost your sound for a minute then, but it looks like you're back now. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me, Keysa? No. Again.
This meeting is being recorded.
You probably completely lost your train of thought now.
Oh no, I actually have it. Once I had kids many years ago, I learned to interrupt conversations and pick right back up again.
Hilarious.
But is my volume and voice, because now I'm on my computer, does it sound all right to you?
Yeah, it sounds fine. Yeah, it's good.
All right, great. Yeah, no, so basically I probably was going on too long of a ramble to say I didn't go 100% Bitcoin at the very get-go, but I did understand at the very get-go that Bitcoin was the solution to separate money from state. And that was probably thanks to, you know, a lot of people like Andreas at the time, and Giacomo Zucco and Pierre Richard. You know, I kind of followed some really good people back in the day on Twitter right off the bat. So I got educated fast.
That's interesting, because I only got to know Pierre Rochard. Gosh, I think it was when he joined Riot. So I'd actually attended a seminar or a webinar with his wife. She had done something for Swan where she was just talking about the IRAs, and that was really interesting. But I hadn't connected their last names that they were married. And then he did that hilarious video outside of Riot where he was measuring the emissions. I don't know if I've ever laughed so hard at a Bitcoin video, but I think after that he was on my radar. And then I was like, oh, he's married to Morgan. Okay, I get it. Like, get the whole connection now. But yes, he's absolute genius.
He's amazing. Yeah, brilliant. And then back in the day, there was a show, the World Crypto Network, and Tone Vays was on it, and Jimmy Song. And then, of all people, Richard Hart. So it always cracks me up because I sometimes say Richard Hart was the original Toxic Maxi. But then, of course, he changed course dramatically.
Wait, is that the Gucci guy?
Yeah.
Really? Yep. So he was a maxi at the beginning.
He was a full. I mean, there wasn't that word back then, but yes, he was extremely Bitcoin only back in those days, and so it's funny because I actually did learn a lot from him, and of course from Jimmy and Tone Vays. So I feel very lucky that back then I had a lot of really great education. So.
Sorry, I'm still stuck on Richard Hart. That's really interesting because I always had this notion that like Bitcoin changes you. When it comes into your life, it really kind of grabs you and you just get very focused on it. And that's really fascinating that he was kind of down that rabbit hole, understood it, was, hanging out with people like Jimmy Song. And then next thing you know, he's king of shitcoin. That's incredible. I had no idea.
There is that saying, right? You slay your heroes in Bitcoin, and I mean, I think this happens frequently, and I don't really understand why. Some people just tend to do other things. Although I will say, at one point, he kind of came back on my radar, a few years ago. I guess when people were really just joking a lot about his whatever it was, whatever his thing is that he does. I forget the name, Hex or something, Yeah, and then I was like, what did happen to him? And I found something where he basically said that he sat back and missed the whole opportunity to make money. He was so stuck on Bitcoin that he let all these opportunities slide by him as he saw it. Of course, I don't see shitcoins that way, but yeah, and he just decided, no, I'm not going to be doing that anymore. And he just really went for the fiat gains instead of like the changing the world gains, which I think, to me, that's the difference, between folks that are truly Bitcoin maximalists. Then, yeah, sure, everyone will be happy if they can have greater purchasing power, but that's not the only reason that we're in it.
Yeah, I mean, I get a little bit irritated, I think is the word, when I see lots of Bitcoiners that I generally respect banging on about the price, and I don't check the price, and I just I think to myself, really, is like, have you so missed the point that you're the 58K gang, that's the other one that keeps it. The only reason I know what goes on with the price is because people tweet. If they weren't tweeting about it, I would have no idea. And it really, honestly, maybe I would check it once a year just out of curiosity, but I don't know that it would really feature in a big way in my kind of radar. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's sort of almost like it has a Lord of the Rings vibe. It's like, why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I Bitcoin?
Yeah.
What could happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think as soon as one realizes that it's a zero-sum game, and if you win, someone else is left holding the bags. For me, that's just kind of the what's the word? That just seals the deal for me. I don't want to be playing those kind of games myself. But and then with regard to the price, though, just to comment on what you were saying there, I do understand that there's an element of the price and number go up that is realistically, just factually, what draws large amounts of people into Bitcoin during a bull run. So I do understand that part of the fixation on that is, and each one knows within themselves, what they're here for. And the price is it engages the population at large, and so if it didn't do what it does, I think there'd be far less interest overall. So I do see the benefit in that. And of course, the purchasing power is, important. People, need to trust that. But it goes back to the fiat problem that we have, right? Is that we need, because we don't have money that stores value in the long run, everybody is desperately trying to figure out how to maintain their purchasing power, if not increase it. So, I mean, I do think a lot of it does come back to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. That is very true. So what happened along your journey then? So you go on Bitcoin Twitter, you're following like some very decent people, learning lots about it. What triggered you to write the book in the first place?
Well, then in about the beginning of 2022, I decided, okay, I really need to make a greater effort. I wasn't living in the place I'd lived for a lot of my adult life. We've moved a lot as well with our kids, just for different reasons. But I realized that I wanted to kind of let a big portion of my friends and family group that I hadn't seen in some time and I hadn't been that much in touch with, and I hadn't really spoken to them about Bitcoin. And I just kind of reached that point of, I really need to just explain this better to them. Like, even if I'd tried, it hadn't ever gone very far, and people just thought it was all, funny money, as so many still do.
So were you like an island in your family where you were down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and everyone else was like, weirdo?
No, not my nuclear family are super blessed. They're all 100% on board. It's more extended family and and then just friends.
Right.
Yeah. And I hadn't even, so because of that, I just didn't talk about it much. But then I was like, you know what? I know enough that I feel confident that I need to just share this, and then they can take it or leave it. But at least I've really put an effort into doing my part. And so I started writing an email, and the email just literally went on and on and on. And I was like, oh my goodness, nobody's going to read this. I mean, this is just one giant long paragraph of text. And I said, okay, well, maybe if I make it bullet points, it'll be more readable. So I went back to the beginning and I started kind of making it more paragraphs and bullet points and trying to break it down more legibly. And I was like, oh, that looks good. That looks better. And then I kept writing, though, because I wasn't done yet. And at a certain point, I just said, you know what? This is too much. This is too long. Like this, I have too much to say. This is not an email. This is a book. So I copy pasted the entire thing into a Word document and basically wrote the book. And recently I've actually found that original draft in that email. And I was laughing because I knew I had done that, but I had never gone back to read it or anything. And I recently found it. I was like, oh, this is funny.
So, gosh, that's hilarious. So basically the book flowed out of you.
Yeah, it flowed out of me. And then the only reason it got finished was that Miami 22 was coming up. And I thought, well, that would be a good place to do a soft launch. It was a very soft launch because I was very shy. But it did give me the kind of goal of completion in time to get it printed for that, which literally it got... I was in the airport on the way to Miami talking to printers to figure out how to get it printed in time for the conference, which was starting in like 6 days. So yeah, but I did it, and that's how it happened.
Wow. Yep. That's phenomenal. And it's like your writing hasn't stopped since then, because you were saying to me when we were exchanging emails that you're in the midst of writing an article. And it was interesting because I looked up, you said about nonviolent communication which was developed by Marshall Rosenberg. Never heard of it. And so I looked it up and I was like, oh gosh, this is really interesting. So I'd love to know where is the leap from the simplest Bitcoin book ever written to nonviolent communication, and how do you see the things tying in together?
Okay, yeah, actually, well, just before jumping into that, I guess I just want to say that the book, that I did do a second edition. So it got released just in time for Nashville this last year. And so just to let folks know that it is updated now, because a lot has changed since 22. I mean, most of the book remains the same because it is for beginners, but I updated all the charts and sort of like the stats and the numbers and the inflation and all that. And I also added a really nice chapter on Nostr at the end. So just wanted to say that that's out now. So if folks go to the website, and it's a free download, then the second edition is up. So I did that. And it was the best-selling book at the merch booth in Nashville, just by the way, which blew my mind. But that was really cool. And I think it's because people are looking for something that's simple and digestible, and it fills that checks that box. But yeah, the nonviolent communication actually was my past life. So I studied and taught that for 10 years before diving into Bitcoin. So yeah, I've sort of been aware the whole time that I wanted to find a way to bring them together, because I kept having these sort of just moments of like insight, like, oh, this reminds me, these certain aspects remind me of NVC. And then I also, over time, Twitter is kind of a challenging place. I've just found that it tends to be a place that brings people's most sarcastic self a lot of the time to the forefront. And, I understand that, of course, free speech is free speech, and I have no problem with anybody speaking however they want to. And at the same time, in my personal life, I realized many years ago that doing that doesn't necessarily bring the best results. And, the reason I dove into NVC all those years ago was that my kids were really young. And I was literally desperately trying to find a way to live the compassion that I wanted to live with my kids, while also remaining respectful in communication and kind, and having boundaries, and being a parent. So it was, how do you do all of that? Because just yelling at them doesn't really work, but you don't want to let them walk all over you either, right? And so when I discovered NVC, it was oh my goodness, it was the same. It was like falling down that rabbit hole. I felt the same way as I did falling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Like,
really?
I just discovered the key to the universe. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I can say pretty unequivocally that to this day, my long marriage, that is what I would call a very, very healthy and happy marriage, is very much due to us both having learned and practiced nonviolent communication. And then also my relationship with both of my kids is as beautiful as it is because of that. And my relationship with myself and with the world, because NVC is not, there is a 4-step process, but that's really what you learn in a workshop or in the book, and it's a life raft to kind of organize your thoughts when they're all jumbled and you're all emotional. But you don't speak like that when you're talking to people. What NVC really teaches you is to look for the need under the action of the words. So there's this understanding that all humans share the same needs. We all want happiness. We all want peace. We all want health. We all want connection. We all want to be understood. We all want to communicate, like these really core values, you could say. And where we come into disarray with each other is in how we fulfill these needs. And a lot of times when people's needs are dramatically not met repeatedly, especially as kids, they tend to find strategies to meet those needs that are very unhealthy and damaging, either to themselves and or to other people, right? But really all they're trying to do is meet a need. Even the worst criminals, they're just trying to meet a need. And they just don't know a better way to do it.
Can you give an example of that? So, I mean, when you sort of say that all human beings have these universal kind of traits that everybody wants the same thing, basically everyone has the same needs. Can you give an example of one of those needs where a human being that's not coming from a healthy place, like what would they replace it with?
Well, they would replace the action, not the need, right? So, for example, if someone's hungry and they're needing food, right? And so if they could go and let's say they don't have a job and they're, well, it's so okay, and they go steal something from the store to eat, right? Mm-hmm. So their need was just for food. They were hungry.
Yeah.
But the strategy they used to meet the need wasn't healthy for them or for the store, and they probably get in trouble for that. So if they kind of rather went to look for work or asked the store owner, hey, I'm really hungry, can I get something to eat if I sweep your floor? Just a different strategy to meet the same need. And so, it's the same, like if a child is screaming at you because you're on the phone, on a call talking to someone, and your kid wants some connection, and they're screaming at you to try and get the connection, and you're just getting super frustrated and telling them to just shut up and go to your room. Like, I'm busy. Can't you see I'm busy right now? Whereas if you just take a moment on the call and just, say, can you hold on a moment, and then check in with your kid and just say, are you just really wanting some connections, some time with mama right now? And they're like, yeah, come play with me. Oh, you really want to play? Yeah. Okay, honey. Well, I hear that. And I'm on this call right now that I really need to finish. So how about if I play with you when I get off the phone? And the kid's like, okay, great. How long are you going to be? Well, I'll do my best to be done in 5 minutes, but it might be 10 or 15 minutes. You can go set a timer and see how long it takes mama, something like that. So that's where you're giving empathy to the other person. You're trying to understand what need they're wanting to meet, and then you're making an agreement with them. So, I mean, it's basically either I'm expressing my needs or I'm listening to what yours are. And then we work out a solution together that works for both parties.
And how do you identify the need then? Is it just purely through asking?
Yes, it's through asking. And I like that you say that, because it's really through asking and what we'd say guessing. We guess what the need might be. We don't say with the kid, you don't say, oh, I see you're needing connection, but like, I'm not available right now. You say, like, is it that you really want to connect with mama? Like, ask the question. You let the other person have the autonomy and their own sovereignty to let you know if that's true or not. And just by asking and showing interest and curiosity and care, that in itself often will meet so many needs, because the needs are like, we have all of them all the time. I like to see it like a graphic equalizer of needs, right? So there's certain moments in life where some are pulled really high up on that equalizer and some are way down, but they're not gone. It's not that I never want food again in my life. I'm just not hungry right now, Or it's not that I never want exercise again in my life. It's just that right now I don't want or need exercise. So exercise or food or connection or love or compassion or creativity, they're all on the spectrum of needs. They're just not all pulled up all at the same time. Thank goodness, or we'd be in trouble. So our job is generally to find out, what am I needing and wanting right now, and what can I do to meet that need? And if I'm with other people and there's an issue between us, it's about looking at putting all the needs on the table that I have and you have right now, and then saying, I wonder how we can meet these in the way that works for both of us. So it's a very curious process. Like, you maintain curiosity.
Interesting. So how do you relate this back to Twitter, say?
Oh, it's just sometimes the way people talk. When you use ad hominem and you're attacking people's character or calling them all kinds of names, as people do sometimes, or coming back with a sarcastic comment to a remark that someone makes. And sometimes someone's really making a remark in good faith, and then they just get slammed because maybe it wasn't the most intelligent thing relative to what's being discussed, or because there's just a lot of disagreement about how to move forward with certain things in Bitcoin. And, I think, I guess talking that way meets some needs for people. Maybe they think they're expressing like their freedom to speak however they want. And we all have a need for freedom and choice. And at the same time, I think that there's ways that people could speak to each other that was more with curiosity or making an attempt to connect rather than to make fun of, that could just bring lift everybody up rather than using sarcasm, because people that are comfortable with it, it's fine. It's like, I say it's fine. It's what they've chosen, and when they get attacked in that way, they say, I don't care. Like, you can talk to me however you want. Like, people say they don't care. I have a hard time believing that it's the most enriching for people. I mean, maybe it's for some people. I have no idea, actually. For me, it isn't. I'll just stick to myself.
I think of it a little bit more like a sort of public flogging in some way. It's almost like people view celebrities, or people view people that they don't know personally on Twitter as this kind of, I don't know how to describe it, really. It's almost like an entity that doesn't have feelings. And because that entity has chosen to put itself in the public square and make a statement, then it's like all bets are off. Well, you decided to make the statement publicly. You didn't make it bilaterally, between two people, whatever. And therefore, you're inviting any kind of response we as the mob decide to make. And I think it's a lot of that. I mean, I remember having this very, I'm going to make a confession here, but having this very unhealthy addiction of just like on a weekend, just to kind of get over my work stress, I'd sit at the kitchen table and I'd have breakfast and I'd read the Daily Mail, and I'd just put nasty comments on all the celebrities of all their stupid photos. And this is ridiculous. And I can't believe she said that. And this is so stupid, because to me, they're not people that I know personally. And I remember at one point just thinking, gosh, this is super toxic, because I'm sat there in my anon Daily Mail account mouthing off. And it reminds me of that scene in The Simpsons. You remember the dude in his basement drinking wine and just like trolling everyone?
No, I don't. But I've watched very little TV over all my life, so I know who The Simpsons are, but I've probably watched like 2 episodes.
Well, you probably haven't missed much, but they did have some very funny scenes. But it kind of makes me think, and it was a stress release. I'll be honest. If I'm really honest, there was definitely a level of stress release, because my view, if you had asked me, was it moral? I'd say, well, that person's never going to read that comment. Well, sometimes they do. You hear celebrities sometimes say, oh, I read all the comments and I developed an eating disorder, or, I don't, they do. They say like, gosh, it's really rough. I mean, Joe Rogan always says that. He's like, all his friends have podcasts. They're like, never read the comments, never read the comments.
No, this is true. And it's like, I would say 2 things to that. It does go, I think it's kind of like what we put out into the universe, regardless of if it's in our mind or in our words or in our actions, it has an effect. It has ripples. And once one really realizes that, you want to I want to create ripples that are the same that I want to come back to me, because part of my spiritual beliefs is such that whatever I put out comes back to me 3 times. And so, there's that part of it. Now, that said, even my teacher, Marshall Rosenberg, he used to say, if you he would call it the jackal and the giraffe. So the jackal is our habitual response, which can be very toxic or nasty. And it's what we often experience out in the world. And it's a lot of judgment, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt-based kind of language and thoughts. And, he said, if your jackals are jumping, is what he would say. He's like, go and yell in a room with the door closed, or write it down, do something with it. You can express it. It's okay to express it, but don't go say it to the person that you're mad with, because he said that would be a tragic expression of an unmet need. Because if you're upset with someone, it means that you have an unmet need in that relationship or in that moment. And you're not going to get that precious need met by going and yelling and cussing that person out. In fact, you're going to be even less met after that. And of course, the worst end result of being that way is violence. And I literally think we could stop world wars if global leaders could actually talk to each other in the simple fashion that Marshall Rosenberg created.
But what would you say is the unmet need in violence? So if you're violent towards somebody else, what's the unmet need that you have?
Oh, it really would depend on the moment, right? So it could be anything, and violence, I would say, is more of a strategy. I mean, I suppose I could feel extreme anger and pain and then act violently. But it can be many things, It can stem from being very disappointed at an action. It can be something where somebody hurts me and then I want to hurt them back. And he doesn't say to never, he says we can use protective use of force. So if someone is trying to hurt you, you don't just he's not suggesting you lay down and let them beat you up. You can use force to protect yourself. And so the unmet need would be love, it would be care, it would be compassion, it would be connection. I mean, the needs we work with the list of needs, actually. They're not set in stone, and some teachers add some needs, others take some off, but there's a good amount on there. I'm guessing maybe 50. I'm totally getting that off the top of my head right now, but it's very much specific to the moment. And that's the other beautiful thing about nonviolent communication. It's not like this formula that you can just put on a situation and say, like, oh, I'm going to psychoanalyze the situation and here, now I fixed it for you. It's very much about just growing one's own awareness in the moment and say, wow, right now I'm just feeling a lot of sadness and I'm really needing or wishing for more understanding, and I'm not, like, let's say I'm having a conversation with someone and they're just not getting me, and I could just be like, I'm not sure how to make myself more clear, but I just want to name that right now I'm not being understood as I'd like, and maybe could you ask me a couple questions about what I'm saying that's not clear to you, and maybe I can find a different way to say it. That's just an example. I mean, like I said, it's a process. It's not an end result. But the end result is connection. When people connect on the level of needs, your humanity comes through. It's like, I hear you, I see you as a human being with needs just like I am. And I understand that in this moment we're choosing different strategies, and I don't like your strategy, you don't like my strategy to meet the needs, but those strategies are attempts to meet a deeper need, and I can connect to you on that level because I also have the need to be understood. I also have the need for love. I also have the need for collaboration, but I don't like how we're collaborating right now. I really would like us to find a different way to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm just reflecting on it. It's just very profound. If I'm silent, I'm just absorbing what you're saying and turning it over in my head. What if somebody doesn't want to meet your needs? So in a situation, say, where you're having that interaction, you say to somebody, like your example, I'm not feeling understood. Could you ask me a couple of questions? And they just say, no, you're so stupid. Why don't you, I don't know, get it or whatever. What's your strategy using this kind of framework to deal with that?
You always are at choice, right? Always. And not everybody knows that they're always at choice, so we have to even have compassion for that. But ultimately we are, right? And even in a situation where we're being physically restrained, we still have choice in how we respond in our mind to a situation. So I'm just putting that little piece there. So in what you're asking, if the person says that, we can choose whether to stay in that interaction or to leave it. And we could check in with them and just be like, okay, so it sounds like right now you're telling me that you don't want to ask me any more questions. So is it true that right now perhaps you're just feeling frustrated and you don't want to continue this conversation at all? So you try and give them some empathy. You try and understand what's going on for them. And this is the part that's the most challenging, because when your needs are not being met and you're connected to your pain around it, it can be very difficult to find the space to give the other person empathy, right? But if you can, you're far more likely to end up creating the connection you were looking for in the first place. if you cannot, if you're in too much pain, you can just say, wow, okay, I just heard what you said. That's just triggering me even further. I'm going to take some space right now because I need to just give myself some empathy. I need to step out of the room. I'll check back in with you in 10 minutes or in half an hour and see if where you're at and if you're willing to perhaps continue or see where I'm at, and we can take it from there. But right now, I'm just going to take some space. So, and that's using protective use of force without any violence. It's just physically removing yourself from the room. Because if they're expressing clearly that they don't care and don't want to continue, I mean, you can't force them, you know. So then you can choose to go give yourself empathy. You could choose to go call up a friend and be like, whoa, I'm in so much pain right now. Can you just listen to me for like 10 minutes? I just really need an ear, you know. Or like you can ask for help. You can say, I need some advice. Like, this is what just happened. Is there something I could have done different that I'm just not seeing? And you could ask somebody else to help you.
This is so interesting. I didn't even realize that you were down this rabbit hole, but it's really fascinating. And how do you relate that to Bitcoin then? I mean, do you see it because it's like a non-violent? Is that the key connecting piece?
So there is this article coming out, right? So I'll say a few things.
Don't do a spoiler then.
I don't want to do too much, just because it's coming out in the next Stackchain magazine. So I'm really excited and happy about that. And at the same time, yes, I don't want to say the whole thing because, like I said to you, we could touch on it and I'd love to, but I didn't want to. But what we just talked about, actually, that isn't so much in the article. In the article, I really did do more of a comparison, you could say, or a pondering on where these two do intersect. And so there's a number of different ways, but I see it like when you have sound money, that's great. But money itself is a communication tool. And so when we're going to be communicating with people, it's like when you have good money, but you have bad communication, to me, there's an imbalance there. It's like one wing of the bird is broken. Because to me, like a sound world and a thriving world includes sound money and sound relationships. I can't see how you can have one and not the other and be thriving.
Do you know, I mean, I guess this is probably one of the problems with that Bitcoin fixes it meme though, isn't it? Is that we have this sort of belief that I have this funny belief, and it's not it's not a strongly held belief, but it's let's call it a hypothesis that we live in a simulation, and let's call it like a computer program. So we're in this simulation and it's malfunctioning, like it has a virus or there's been a problem and the patches haven't worked. And Bitcoin is like the antivirus that has been injected into the matrix, and it's now going around and cleaning everything up. So I almost have this overly utopian view of Bitcoin sometimes that I turn around in my head, that it's this thing that will just fix everything because it will permeate our matrix and it will basically resolve everything. But you're saying there's really another layer to it that is not Bitcoin.
Yes, it doesn't fix communication between people. Now, it will fix a lot of the communication, though, because oh gosh, I'm having so many thoughts at the same time. Just based on what you just said. Thank you, that was great. It will fix some of it, because when you fix the money, you do fix so many foundational aspects of life on Earth and human cooperation and collaboration. And that in itself will fix some communication, because of course a lot of troubled communication, whether between partners or parents or children or workers, co-workers, bosses, is from stress, right? And so when the money is broken and everybody's extra stressed out and the money's losing value, like an ice cube melting, and everybody's extra stressed out, then everybody is less present to themselves and to the people around them and is naturally more reactive. And so communication breaks down quicker. So in that sense, yes, fixing the money can help fix a lot of communication. issues. But no, I think just as much as money's been broken, communication has been broken. And by a fiat language that is actually designed to power over, especially like English. I don't want to speak into all the languages, but I would say the Latin-based languages, they, and in fact, I know, okay, sorry, let me finish one thought. So there are aspects of English that are designed to disconnect and power over. So for example, the word deserve, he deserves what's coming to him, or he deserves that punishment. It's a dangerous word because it actually makes it easy and even enjoyable to see someone have pain inflicted on them because, well, they deserved it, right?
So you kind of see it as like language creates reality.
Yes, it does. I mean, it is. Fiat, the word fiat, what it actually means is a decree. It's like, it's the word. And I mean, even the beginning of the Bible says, and the word was God. I mean, the word, our words, and where's the word spelling come from? It's casting a spell. Like, words do create reality, and they do create our thoughts. If you're angry, you can look at what you're thinking. I would bet that you probably have a should in there, a should or a shouldn't. So next time you're angry or even irritated or frustrated, that's a whole spectrum. Anger is a spectrum that starts from very mild irritation, and if it's not dealt with at that point, it builds up into greater irritation and then into frustration and annoyance, and then, well, I could say annoyance and then frustration and then anger and then rage, right? They're all on a spectrum. And if you look at any of that spectrum and you look at what you're thinking when you're feeling those things, you'll find thoughts that have a should or a shouldn't. He should or shouldn't do that. She should or shouldn't be doing, I should or shouldn't be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And so those thoughts are creating your reality, because then they're creating that pain and that anger. And then you're acting from that place, which is dysregulated and imbalanced, So there is that. Sorry, did you want to say? I know I'm just talking away. I'm on such a roll.
No, not at all. I'm listening. I'm just fascinated. I'm trying to balance listening and going off into my kind of processing of what you're saying, and actually just saying. But yes, I'm just absorbing it. Yeah.
So okay. So to go back to the question you asked, though, about fixing the money fixing the world. So I think that because our communication is broken, so both on the actual language we use, there's also diagnoses. And when we diagnose someone as being an idiot, we're putting them in a box and we're not leaving any space. Like, if someone's an idiot, if you think someone's an idiot, you're not going to waste your time with that person, right? Because that would be a silly thing to do if you've decided that they're an idiot. And so when we diagnose and judge people, we reduce them to a label in a box, and we leave no openness. We get rid of all of our curiosity and our care and our compassion to find a way to connect with this person and to realize that whatever they just did or said that we're labeling idiotic is only one tiny piece of a very fascinating creation. And so if we rather can say to ourselves, gosh, I really don't like what they just said, that really triggered me, what am I feeling? What need of mine wasn't met when they said that? Okay, maybe I can ask them, like, if that's what they really, like, if what I think they meant is what they meant, because maybe I'm making an assumption. Or I can choose to say to them how I feel hearing that, and ask them, if they'd be willing to consider this other thing. So it's just a process about becoming very conscious about what's going on for you, and staying very open to what might be going on for the other person. And I think a problem on Twitter that I've observed is that people, there's this thing about, we're too feeling, like there's this kind of talking down about feelings, and that we need to be more stoic, and certainly men, you know, there's this sort of certain, I don't want to say everybody on Twitter, but there's this certain stream. And while I totally agree that we should not wallow in our feelings, like that doesn't help to just kind of wallow or let them take us down. At the same time, our feelings are like lights on the dashboard of your car. They're letting you know that something's up. And either it's a green light saying, yay, and then you know some needs of yours are met, or if they're uncomfortable or difficult feelings, it's like a red light on the dashboard. And it's letting you know that some needs are not being met. And you best attend to those, because if you don't, they don't go away by themselves, right? They just fester. And they pop up elsewhere, slightly more aggravated. And then they pop up elsewhere, slightly more aggravated. And we start creating enemy images, either of ourselves or of the other person. So, yeah, I think kind of creating a relationship with feelings and a consciousness around them is very important. And then using them as signposts. And then you go, oh, the red light is on. I better go lift the hood of my car and see what's under there, what's going on. And that's where you go and look at what the need is that's not being met. And then you can find a way to meet that need, whether it's you yourself or whether you need to ask someone to help you meet it.
So how would you proliferate this across the world? Because Bitcoin has this incentive system that's built into it where, you know, like the miners have an incentive, the hodlers have an incentive, the users have an incentive. It kind of has this sort of technical system that operates very well with the human psyche in terms of making you do the right thing, for want of a better word. How would you proliferate this sort of through? I mean, I know obviously you're writing an article, so you're sharing these thoughts with the world and you know, kind of, I guess, disseminating the information. But how do you see this spreading, and why do you think that we have a natural tendency as humans perhaps not to communicate in this way?
I'm not sure, to your very last part, I'm not sure why we communicate this way. Like, I don't really understand where we got as disconnected as we are. And if we were once more connected as a species or not, I'm not actually sure about that.
It was the money case. It was the money.
What's that?
It was the money.
Oh, yeah, it's the money, exactly. Yeah. But so I don't know with regards to that, but how to proliferate it. I mean, it is a big movement in the sense of, you know, there's the Center for Nonviolent Communication, and then there's many, many hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of teachers worldwide. It tends to, sometimes when I was writing this article, I thought, I wonder if there's more Bitcoiners in the world or more people that have learned and studied and practiced NVC, because they're both very niche. They're both very small still. And NVC has been around a lot longer, probably the mid-60s, early 70s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so it hasn't caught on like wildfire in a long time. And I will say that from my experience of teaching it for all those years, and working with individuals and with kids and with adults and with big workshops and small workshop settings, what I realized is that people don't like to work very hard. I mean, that's just a big generalization, but it's like teaching old dogs new tricks, changing habits, whatever you want to call it. Everybody knows they should exercise more. Why don't they exercise more? You know, everyone knows probably meditation's a good idea. Why don't people meditate every day? You know, it's just that changing habits seems to be really difficult for humans. Or, you know, people read about Bitcoin and then they're like, oh, that sounds cool, but then are they going to do the 100 hours or the 1,000 hours of study? Like, I don't understand why some of us are able, and I think we're blessed. Like, when people say you get Bitcoin at the price you deserve, I say you get Bitcoin at the price that you are blessed enough to understand it, to grok it.
I would tend to agree with that. Because I think I mean, I first found out about Bitcoin in 2011. My husband told me about it, and he's very technical, and he was really fascinated by this distributed ledger. And I remember him explaining to me, and I just sat there and I just said, this sounds really boring. And then the penny dropped me. I worked in finance for 20 years. I mean, the irony, I understood nothing about money. And the penny dropped me when I left banking, and I was like, right, I want to do something different. And a load of my colleagues were going off to crypto companies. And so I sort of, actually, funnily enough, it's my mum that orange pilled me. I tell this story a lot, so I apologize to anyone listening who's heard this a million times, but she's really into Jordan Peterson. I'm not particularly, but she really liked him, at least in that phase of her life. And I told her, I said, I think I just want to do something completely different. And my colleagues are all going to crypto companies. And she said, oh, Jordan Peterson's just interviewed a bunch of Bitcoiners. Let me send you
I remember that one.
Yeah. And she hadn't watched, I think it's called The Future of Money, ? And she hadn't watched it. So she said, oh, have a listen and see what you think and let me know if it's any good. And I was just like, why is he interviewing Bitcoiners? That's so weird. Like, he's a clinical psychologist. Like, what's that got to do with anything? And it turned out it was a bunch of Bitcoiners who had this book club, and they were studying Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, because they saw it as being related to Bitcoin. Yeah. So they reached out to him and said, can we have a conversation with you about it? And him, being the intellectually curious dude that he is, just went down a rabbit hole. Anyway, very long story short, 90 minutes of that program I watched, and I was just, it was just life-changing. And the next day I said to my mum, she called me up and she's like, oh, was it any good? Shall I watch it? And I just said to her, it's completely changed my life. And she said, what? And I was just like, I've worked in finance for 20 years and I understood nothing about money. And I was like, that 190-minute thing, everything that just confused me about the financial system, all of the weird incentive systems, the unnecessary complexity, it was like in that instant, it just all fell away and everything fell into place.
I love it.
Just like the weirdest thing. And I still look back on that moment now and I'm just like, I cannot, it's so hard for me to process and be like, how could I have been immersed in this water for like 20 years and not even been aware of it being there?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is what you're saying is making me think about NVC. It's kind of like people, we all work with money in some way all of our lives, and we don't really understand it. And we also don't understand why we can't get ahead and why it seems so confusing and why the system seems messed up, but we don't understand how it is. It's like that with language and with communication, because a lot of people, we all talk every day and we have communications and relationships with people, but a lot of the time they're very challenging or somewhat challenging, and people just don't really know why, and they don't understand why. And when you start to break it down, just like you start to break money and the money system down, and you go, oh, that's why. It's that way with NVC. You start breaking it down and you literally see, oh, when you talk like this, or when you say this thing, or when you make this judgment, like, no wonder that's going to lead to disconnection. It's like perfectly obvious once you understand it.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because it does throw a whole different. I was just thinking when you were talking there about people that annoy you in your life, and you're irritated by them, and you feel like they're kind of trying to get something from you all the time, and they feel very kind of like an energy suck. And I think if I think about this in the NVC context, it's like they're having an unmet need, and you're kind of pushing back against them. And so the more you push back, I often find the most annoying people that you try your damn hardest to stay away from and keep away from you, they just keep trying to bother you all the time. And I've often pondered why that is. And actually, now that I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh, okay, they had a need that they had, that's something that they wanted from me. I denied it to them. And so there's this unmet need and they can't let go of it, and they're just going and going and going.
Yeah. And because no one's brought to consciousness what is going on underneath, what is the needs, and then it just becomes this unresolved kind of push-pull thing. And at the same time, I do want to stress that it's never any one person's responsibility to fill any other one person's need. It comes back to a choice. Once the need or the value is expressed and the strategy is the request is made, then it's up to the person who the request is being made of whether they want to fulfill it. So it's never, because if they don't have a choice, then it's actually a demand that was made. And if someone makes a demand, the only two possible responses to a demand are to submit to the demand or to rebel against it. And neither of those lead to a positive outcome, because if you rebel against a demand, it just creates more disconnection for both parties. If you submit to it, there's a part of you that's like, you don't feel good. You know that you're just doing this out of some duty or obligation, but you're not doing it with any joy, and none of your needs are being met doing it, except maybe to try and prevent future problems. But that's not a healthy place out of which to meet a need. So we want to be sure to make requests and not demands. But yeah, to what you just said there, exactly that there was never that what you described, that situation with sort of a person or people like that. It's when the deeper needs are not brought to the surface of awareness, then there's a dynamic that's being kind of played out without anybody realizing what's being played out. So it doesn't have completion, it doesn't have resolution,
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah. There's a lot, and like, I mean, again, to your question of I really liked your question about what's going to incentivize people. Like, what would incentivize people to do this? Because we know what incentivizes people to engage with Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin has its built-in sort of system of incentives. And
it does, but it's interesting just to go back to that comment that you made, actually, to tie up that loose end, because I did actually want to ask you about that. You were saying about how people don't want to do the work.
Yeah.
And I do tend to agree with you. But I sometimes think it's like if the ground isn't fertile at that particular time, the seed just doesn't take root. So for me, I'd spent 20 years immersed in a system that I was just honestly quite confused by. I was kind of like, I'd ask people questions that I thought were reasonable. I would get very woolly answers, very complex answers. And I would look around me all the time at work and think, this is such a weird system, because none of it makes sense. Like, everybody's basically, I would sit there and ponder it, and I'd say to myself, me as a retail customer, when I'm relating it to the banking system, but I'd be like, I go off and I invest my money in a pension fund, because why do I do that? Well, because money's getting debased. So the first response I ever had when I asked somebody about inflation in like an educational setting was, oh, the reason we have inflation is because people keep asking for more money, like higher wages. And I sat and pondered it. Yes. Yeah. And this was from an economist. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And I was sat there and I thought to myself, well, that doesn't make sense, because in a work context, the old people retire out and they're the highest paid. And then you get young people come in who get paid less because they have less experience. And so the system should be in equilibrium the whole time, actually. And so I never had that question answered over like 2 decades. It was almost. And then I also used to look at the whole banking system, because I worked in various capacities. So I worked for a data provider, worked at a broker, I worked at an interdealer broker, so they were operating in between the banks. And then I worked at a bank, and obviously our customers were like the asset managers and the pension funds. Okay. I used to look at it and just say to myself, here you are, you sort of this individual. So we've got inflation. I haven't got a satisfactory answer why that exists, but fine, moving on. I go and I put my money in a pension fund. And now the pension fund manager takes a fee, and what they do is they try and preserve the value of that money as everything sort of, as inflation keeps plodding on. So they then go and buy stocks in companies. So you can see there's some value there. Somebody's running a business, they're creating value. So the pension fund manager invests in the companies that are doing best. That bit is fairly logical. But then every time they're transacting in and out of these things, they're going to a bank and doing the transaction so that they can maintain anonymity and not move the market. Then, what do the banks do? Well, the banks have to move their positions and balance their books when they're making markets. So they trade with each other through interdealer brokers in order to maintain their anonymity and not move the market when they're trying to offload or purchase positions. And along this whole tree, everybody is taking a cut, and they're all paid very well. And there are entire global industries that have spawned off of it. And at the root of all of this entire mechanism, when you discover that there's a solution to inflation, which is scarcity, you're like, we don't need any of this system.
Yeah.
Like literally none of these people are doing anything useful. And you feel it when you're in the system. You're being paid well, but you sit there and you go, what am I doing? I've created nothing of value. I've got nothing to show for today's work. I sat there and I pushed a spreadsheet around or did a presentation deck. And I think for me, it culminated when I got to like the end of my banking career, and I did like 3 days, three days. God, it was way longer than that. 3 years in corporate innovation. And I was so excited to be in this division. I was like, we're going to change this banking system. We're going to revolutionize it. It's going to be amazing. We'll make everything efficient. Things will work properly. They won't be confusing. You know, I was very utopian about the whole thing. And then I discovered that like the incentive structure was such that the immune system of the bank just kicks in immediately. Business segments have their own budgets, and they usually it's decided how they'll spend those budgets kind of 18 months in advance. So when you go to them and you say, there's this great new technology, you should test it. They don't have the money to spare to do it. If they do, they're not going to do it for 18 months. They need some certainty because nobody's going to pat them on the back for trying out a technology that then flops and fails. And so the incentive that they have, because they can print money and they're making money anyway, is just business as usual. You know, don't rock the boat. And, you know, I'm 10 years out from my pension. There's no upside to me doing this. And it was just a depressing thing. And then when I sort of realized what Bitcoin was, I was just like, and this is what I mean, I was primed. I was just like, oh my God, like, this is it. This is the thing that just, you know, dismantles this whole ridiculous, complicated, unnecessary system. I mean, the hours people spend watching like non-farm payrolls and the Fed and the this and the that. And I just sit there and I think, all of that goes away. Like all of it goes away. And sure, you've got a bunch of unemployed people, but I bet they'll be much happier being farmers.
Well, and don't we, I mean, just looking at the world, don't we need more farmers and we need less finance bros, right? I mean, really, like it is absolutely bizarre to me how many people do things that don't, like you said, don't offer any value to the world. And when you just kind of pull all the way back, it puts a lot of pressure on the people that are actually doing the stuff that needs to be done. Because so many people are not doing anything that needs to be done.
And often they're at the bottom of the money tree, which is the fascinating thing.
The most tragic, of the part of the whole. Yeah, exactly.
And it's almost as if it's by design, but it's this is what I mean when I say like malware. It's like it's a parasitic thing. And it's just destroying the host. You know, because it's metastasizing into this massive. I mean, when I think about, oh my God, Lisa Scott from Sinota, I ran a founders course last year and she came and did a session on payments.
Okay. She's going to do something coming up as well, right?
She is, yeah. And it's a sort of modified version of what she did last year because she's focusing specifically on what her company or her and her brother's company, Sinota, is doing. So they're doing incredible things in the energy market. But she has deep experience in the whole payment system. And so you should go back and watch her session, actually, because you're a member, aren't you? So you should go back and look at the thing. But I mean, it's fascinating because she talks about just the complexity of it. And you just realize how this thing has turned into this behemoth and it's completely inefficient. Like completely inefficient. Everybody's waiting ages to get paid. Like there's lots of risk that people take on because they're waiting to get paid, and like, you know, the markets are moving in the meantime. Just the whole thing is
it's a house of cards. I mean, it is absolutely, and you know, then looking at the national debt, just that alone, and then the unfunded liabilities or whatever that thing's called. It is so bizarrely remarkable to see what us humans have brought ourselves to. And I love how Jeff Booth says it's all of us. Like I have lived as many years as I've lived. I am part of it, no matter whether I was a cash person until 10 years ago. I didn't even have credit cards. I've still been here on Earth, participating in life on Earth. So I am part of this problem, you could say. And so if I want to see it change, I need to just focus, especially now that I feel so lucky to know the solution. I need to just put my attention on the solution because now we know what it is and participate. Like he said, just work in the new system. It's here. It's your choice. You can just work in it. And then the old system falls away for you, just falls away. And that is how it's going to fall away, is by us just not feeding it anymore, you know, with our attention, with our money, or with our time. and just bringing ourselves over to the new world, because the old one is completely, like you are very clearly describing, bizarre, like malware infested.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And it's not just, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, it's like everybody's sleepwalking. I mean, I think this is why Bitcoiners are so annoying to everybody, because we're walking around like Chicken Little going, the sky's falling down. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Watched Netflix last night? We're like, oh my God.
And we're like, the sky's falling down, but we've got an umbrella. Here you go. And they're just like, what? Like on both sides, you're crazy.
Yeah, they're like, no, it's too much.
Down, and your umbrella is made of like, magic woo-woo.
And I've had a bunch of boomers actually say to me how worried they are now about their savings and with everything that's going on. And I say to them, just buy $100 worth of Bitcoin. And, I've had a series of different answers. One was like, I need a bit more time to study it. And this was from a family member that knows I've been down the rabbit hole for 3 years now. And another one said, oh, it's too technical. I don't think I've got the capacity to learn that now. And I just sit there and I go, it's literally like, go and buy $100. In fact, just give me the $100. I'll buy it for you. And you can write 12 words down, store them somewhere safe, and you never have to look at them until Armageddon hits. How about that?
Yeah. Sometimes it literally comes to that. And and then they're very lucky to have you there but then they still sometimes just say no, right? I mean, I've had that. I've had all kinds of things. But, I think one of the other ways where Bitcoin and nonviolent communication are similar is that they're both born out of pain. Both of them were developed by like Satoshi, clearly showing us with the Genesis block, headline, what Bitcoin sort of was a reaction and a response to, that pain of the crash of the market. And, that represents kind of the whole madness of the market. And then Marshall Rosenberg brought nonviolent communication forth out of the pain of his experiences growing up and being bullied, and then also just witnessing, he became a psychologist to try and understand human nature, and then witnessing how labeling people wasn't helping them heal, and then ended up, well, it's a long story, but basically he created nonviolent communication out of the pain of the disconnection, and realized that the way we talk to each other and the way we perceive each other, it's not only how we talk, it's also how we perceive and think about each other, is partly to blame. And so I think, to what you're saying, it's going to just be pain that's going to really bring the masses over eventually. It's the same as privacy, with communications. Once the surveillance state becomes a real problem in one's daily life, then everyone's going to go like, oh, wait, what do we do? Oh, Signal? Oh, Master? Like, you mean you're not going to I just read something on Twitter yesterday. Some woman, completely random, Twitter feeds you random stuff, has an eBay account that she's been using for 20 years, selling antique stuff, and has a massive inventory on there. It's her livelihood. And they just banned her entire account without any possibility for appeal, because she had some old thing that was, I don't know, it's stamped coins maybe back in and this thing was an ancient little piece of equipment, this little tiny thing. And they said it violated their terms and conditions. And so it's just pointing to that whole centralization issue or the surveillance issue. Like, so whether you've built your business on a platform like Facebook or Instagram or eBay for that matter, or YouTube, just being able to be banned at the drop of a hat for no apparent reason is terrifying. So I think, if that starts happening en masse, and or the surveillance becomes an issue in their daily lives, then they're going to look for alternatives. And it's the same with the money, as inflation gets worse and worse, then people might start looking at hedges. And with communication too, that's a little, I don't know why people are willing to put up with as much pain with communication. I think a lot of the times they just don't know there's a solution. Like, we looked long and hard before we found NBC. And we tried other stuff. And the other stuff, I'm not saying none of the other methods work, but for us, they didn't. And we were just determined to find something.
So when you say we, who's we?
My husband and I.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, we had two very, very strong-willed kids. At the time, the one was really young, but our son was about 7, and like insanely next level strong-willed is the euphemistic way of putting it. And so we had to find something. We were both, my husband and I were very like easy going, and just we would come up, we'd butt heads sometimes, but we just would kind of figure it out. But when it came to the kids, it was like, oh, how do we do this? And that's, so, but I'm just thinking, like, why don't more people find nonviolent communication and use it? Because I know many, many people struggle horribly with their relationships, whether they're beloved or their children or their parents or whatever. Like, why? There's this incredible, I feel the same way about nonviolent communication as I do about Bitcoin. The tool is here, people. Use it, learn it, practice it. Yes, it's hard. Yes, you've got to, every single day, you've got to journal for like a year or two. You've got to
is that really how you adopt it?
Well, that's how I did. I mean,
really?
You need, well, actually, I got the book, I got the workbook. I did a 3-day workshop. I was obsessed. I started reading the book and doing all the exercises in the workbook written out. I wrote every single answer. I didn't just answer in my mind. And then, I mean, it changed my life. I mean, it rewired my neural pathways completely, really. But
wow.
And then I joined a practice group weekly. And then I started, after a few months, I started another practice group for people who were just really new, because by then I felt like I knew some stuff 6 months later, although I was still a baby. And, one thing just led to the other. But yeah, I did it absolutely fervently. I brought the teacher back every month with me and a friend, brought her back for a year every single month to do a 3-day workshop, an introduction, 3 days. So I did the intro probably 10 or 12 times in a year.
Wow.
So yeah, because when one is habituated, whether it's to using fiat or to judging and blaming and shaming people and oneself, it takes a lot of work to change habits, as we were saying before. So yeah, it takes a lot of work, but it's like worth it. You've got this gift and this gold for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, you've got peace. And you've got.
And so did you find that it materially changed things for you? I mean, did your relationship with your kids change, your husband? Like, what was the impact?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, night and day, like in the sense of like completely. My husband and I will say that immediately, that, yeah, we've been together a really long time. And I'm just not going to say, just because I like my privacy, but it's been a really long time. And and we both put it down pretty much 100% to nonviolent communication, because we've also there were some years that were pretty challenging in there. And yeah, thanks to those tools, we worked through all of that. And with the kids as well, we just have amazing relationships, amazing with our kids who are now adults. And it hasn't always been easy. And the teenage years were really rough. But thanks to NVC, and even there was a lot of times where the kids didn't want to use it. So I would say, okay, well, do you want jackal or giraffe? And especially one of them would yell, jackal. I'd be like, okay, give me your phone. And, you're not going out for 2 days or whatever it is. And I'd say, if you want to work this out, come and let me know. We can use giraffe, which is nonviolent communication, and we can work it out. Like, I have no interest in holding your phone for 48 hours, but I'm also not going to let you have zero consequences for what just happened, And a lot of times they would choose the stubborn route because they were. Yeah. But now they are just the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful human beings. And it's reflected in their relationships and the people that know them and stuff. So it's not just me being a mom, and yeah. So and it also materially changed how I saw myself and could give myself empathy for when things were challenging, whether it was with my husband or my kids. You learn to hold space for yourself in a whole different way, instead of get down on yourself or judge yourself.
You mean like you can sort of recognize in yourself, this is a need that I have and it's not being met, and I get what's going on for me right now. Right.
Yes, exactly. So you have what we call self-empathy. And so actually, I think it's probably the place to start with nonviolent communication, because once you've learned to hold space for yourself, it's far, far easier to hold it for other people, because you don't need them to be the one holding it for you so that you can find your center. You can teach yourself to find your own center. And then you've got far more inner resources to hold space for other people when things are rough. And so, it's not like, it's not a should. It's not like you should always be the one holding space. It's just that if someone else is struggling and you are centered, you're naturally going to want to help them. And it's easy, much easier to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. When did you realize that these two things were connected for you? Like, when did you think Bitcoin and NVC you saw the synergies?
It was probably after I took a break from teaching NVC quite some years ago, because I got pretty frustrated with people wanting an instant fix and not being willing to do the long haul of the work that was required. And it's not like they had to pay me or anything. I mean, they could do it on their own. There's lots of free practice groups. There's tons of online resources. It wasn't about money. It was just about that, that commitment. So I just sort of took a break from that, and then I found Bitcoin. Then after 2022, I was on a space with DJ Satoshi, of all people, and I was mentioning how I thought it would be great to bring some NVC into some of the spaces and into Twitter in general. And he was like, "Oh, well, that's what your thing is here. Like, that sounds like your mission." And I was like, yeah, you've got a point. But I didn't feel confident yet for some reason. I just felt like, even though I'd been in Bitcoin a long time, no one knew that I was, because I was always a non. And I changed my account, though. So I started this account in 2022, because even though I was a non before, it was connected to my email on Twitter. So I just wanted to start fresh. And so, yeah, he planted that seed. So thanks, DJ Satoshi. He definitely planted that seed. And he and I led spaces for a couple of years together. That was great. But I never really dived into the NVC. So he planted the seed. And then just, a few months back, I just started writing and writing and writing. Things kept coming to me. And I just kept noticing. And like I said, when you see the article, it'll come out. You'll see a lot more of how the two are more interlinked. They're both voluntary, they both require a lot of proof of work. They're both very low time preference. They're both built on nonviolence. They both have rules, not rulers. There's lots of different aspects that are, and they're both protocols. I mean, speech is code, right? Code is speech. So that's what you were saying about the matrix and the patching, the Bitcoin's patching, going to patch it up. To me, nonviolent communication is the language and the worldview patch, the compassion patch, because I think we could use a lot of compassion in this world.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're going through a really weird phase. I have a friend who's very into astrology, and I tend to regard those things with a bit of suspicion, but she does sort of drop these like pearls of wisdom sometimes. And, she talks to me about phases that are happening and like, sun flares, and there's this activity and this is what's coming up. But she talks a lot about how humanity's going through this very profound shift, and we're kind of going into a more spiritual, empathetic, compassionate phase, and kind of I don't know how you describe, like a higher being.
Yeah. Okay.
And she sort of talks about this kind of turmoil that happens in the process of, and obviously as Bitcoiners, we look at that from a monetary system. We're like, well, the fiat system's dying, the parasite's killing the host, and now it's like the immune system's kicking in, and there's things come up, and it's kind of, trying to heal that kind of process. So it is very interesting what you're saying, because it's like chicken and egg. I don't know. I mean, I ruminate about this a lot, actually. I'll be honest. I'm quite a pragmatic person in some ways, but I also sit there and I have like very deep thoughts about things sometimes. And I was listening to this podcast a few years ago, and then I ended up buying this guy's book. And I don't know if you've read it, but I think if you haven't, you'd love it. It's by Donald Hoffman, and it's called The Case Against Reality.
Oh, no, that sounds interesting.
I read it in, I think it was December 2019, and it just, I had 10 days. I remember I was walking around, walking my dog, and at the time I was living in New York, and I just could not stop thinking about this book, and I was looking around me the whole time. So his basic premise is that everything, so he's a mathematician by training, I believe, and he had a bunch of PhD students, I think, that he was working with, and he wanted to demonstrate that we function better, like we're the apex species, if you like, on planet Earth, because we see reality, more of reality, or reality more accurately than other species do.
Huh?
And so he set out to prove this mathematically, and actually ended up proving the opposite. That yeah, and so he talks about, like, basically what he says is he gives a really good example. There's this beetle, I think it was in Australia, and the female is sort of shiny and brown, and she has these like bumps on her. And unfortunately, she was very similar looking to this brand of Australian beer bottle. So people were going out into the bush in Australia and drinking beer, chucking the bottles in the wilderness, and then the males of the species was trying to mate with these bottles because he couldn't see that it wasn't the female. And this species, this beetle or whatever it was about to go extinct. So the company changed their bottle, thankfully, to save the beetle.
Whoa.
I know, it's
That
crazy.
Is wild.
And the way he frames it in the book, he says it's kind of like, he said what he has discovered mathematically is that the world is like, like zeros and ones. And he said if you were trying to write an email, it would be impossible to do it if you were doing it with zeros and ones, or it would take you a very, very, very long time. So you have this interface, which is, the little envelope that sits on your desktop, and that's where you write your email, and you hit send, and it, it looks like a paper airplane, and off it goes. And he said, but what you're dealing with is an interface. So he said, it's not that what's happening isn't real because you've made a communication. But he said that what you see as reality is actually an adaptive feature of you as a biological being or whatever, where you have removed all of the things that are not necessary for you to get fitness payoffs, and fitness payoffs being things like food, reproduction, all of that kind of stuff. And so he said, people don't see the world as it really is. They see it as is necessary for their fitness payoff. And of course, after that, I was just walking around mesmerized, looking at everything, going, what's real? What does that really look like? What am I not seeing? What's out there that I don't see? And it really is quite profound when you think about it. It brings up all sorts of stuff, ghosts, aliens, like everything, like, like how many of these things are just things that are there, but I don't have the capacity to view them.
Yeah, our own selves. In fact, this morning I followed a guided meditation, which I don't often do. I usually do my own, but it was fascinating because at the end he said, open your eyes and look around, and just, what are you really looking at? What is really there? And he picked up this book. He's like, we call this a book, but is it really, what is a book? And he opens it up and he goes, look, there's all these squiggles here on this blank background. So it's just, what you're saying is just kind of reminding me of,
which is crazy, because then you read the book and your mind conjures this entire world in your head, and it's very real to you. You see it,
Yeah, we create maps, and they're not the territory, but it's as if they are. It's very fascinating. Wow, that's cool. What was his name, did you say?
It's Donald Hoffman.
The Case Against Reality.
Yeah. It's an amazing book. It'll blow your mind. It's funny because I usually recommend it in concert with two other books that actually say basically the same thing, but from different disciplines. There's a really short book, which is, I think it's called, no, it's not about time, but it's by an Italian physicist called Carlo Rovelli. And he wrote a very short book about time. And it was funny because I was telling a guy, it was actually one of the programmers, I think, at my office, but I was telling him about the Case Against Reality, and there was a guy who was very taciturn. He suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree and was like, oh, I'm reading this book right now that basically says the same thing.
Wow.
Let me see if I can find the actual name of the book, but I've read it a couple of times now. It's very short. If you listen to it like 1.5 speed on audio, you can do it in like 3 hours or something. Books. Okay, so what did he write? Oh, The Order of Time. Sorry, that's the one. The Order of Time. But he looks at it from a physics perspective, and he talks about how we don't see time as it really is, like everything's sort of distorted. And then the other book is called After, and I can't remember the author's name, but it's a guy that was a psychologist, and he basically had or psychiatrist. And he had a girl come in one time. She'd committed or tried to commit suicide, and she was, hospitalized. And she was in a room, and her friend came in, or family member, to see her down, and was taken down the hallway. So never didn't. This is, then this doctor had this interaction with her when he was a young student doctor, and he had eaten some pasta that morning, and the pasta sauce had gone on his tie. And when the girl who had tried to commit suicide eventually came around, she said, "Oh yeah, my friend came in, didn't she? And you were talking to her, you had pasta on your tie." And he's thinking, there's no way you could have known that, like you were in a coma.
Whoa.
And so it set him about this journey where he started like researching people who'd had past life experiences. And he said a really interesting thing at the end of the book, which was such a neat bow for me, having read these other two books. He was saying that he thinks a lot of like the past life experiences that we have, people can't describe them very well when they come back from them. And he said, he thinks that it's because we're in this sort of monkey body, and it has a sort of limited capacity, like an ant. I mean, you could talk to an ant about Aristotle and it'd have no idea what you were saying. And so he said, it's almost like when you come back into your body, it's very hard for you to express, like, that you had this feeling and you have this sense, but you can't communicate it. So yeah, I mean, language is a very poor medium, really. And from what you're saying, it's also adulterated. So it's has all of that on top of it.
Exactly. So it's like we need to be even more, use it with even more awareness and care, in a sense, because it is very poor medium, and yet it's the best we've got. So how can we use it in the most skillful fashion to create what we want?
What if we could just communicate telepathically? I'm sure we can.
Well, I think that we can. I 100% am certain that we can. We've just forgot, and I haven't figured out the way back yet myself. But I think we'll get there. Like, I like what you said about what your astrology friend said. And yeah, I've never dived deep into astrology, but just the other day I pulled out, my sister got my chart done for one of my birthdays. And it was done by someone who hand wrote 6 pages. Like, I mean, who even does that anymore? It was just so beautiful. And I reread it recently. It's been maybe 5 years since she got it done for me. And I was like, said to my husband, well, look at this. Oh my gosh, look at this. Look at this. Like, this woman had never met me. She knew nothing about me except my birth date, time, and place. And I mean, she nailed it in 6 pages of handwriting. She nailed me, and so much. So I'm like, I definitely think there's something to it. And whether it's the astrology part or whether some people just have more intuitive psychicness, I mean, there's certainly people that have a lot of gifts, and there is a lot more than meets the eye to this world. I mean, that's pretty clear. So I do think we're undergoing some massive, I mean, there's a woman, Pam Gregory, she's an astrologer. People really like her. I think she's English, actually.
Oh, that's the one that my friend follows. Yes. She
loves
her.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And she's really talking a lot about this shift stuff. And I mean, you can just see it. You can see it in everything, even the weather. I mean, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but nonetheless, I mean, in governments around the world, elections everywhere, institutions are struggling.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like the veil of ignorance feels like it's being lifted. Like we're learning. Yeah. I mean, I think for me and for many people I talked to on the podcast as well, like COVID was a big wake-up call, because I think the institutions we had believed in, we suddenly realized they weren't what we thought they were. And that's a very painful experience as well, going through that. I mean, I found when I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, it was hugely exciting, but it was also crushing. It was like a death, because everything I'd held to be true was suddenly called into question. And you have to kind of almost rebuild your world view in some ways, and it's still somewhat of an ongoing process. But I feel like what's happening there is that we're seeing like this revelation happen. All these things that we just weren't aware of, they suddenly are coming to the fore. And I find it very interesting how people look at this in different ways. Like, I mean, I started listening, I can't believe this is me, I was so much more left-wing once upon a time, but I started listening to Tucker Carlson. He has a really interesting series of guests, and he's a very committed Christian. So he talks a lot about, he thinks that we're in a spiritual war. So he thinks that a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is he sees it from a religious context of like good versus evil. And that's the battle that we're in. It's fascinating. So I just find it's very interesting how people come from all these different disciplines, mathematicians, physicists, and in some way, shape or form, they're all saying the same thing, but just in different discipline or different language.
Yeah, like it's undeniable. It's just happening on such a huge and profound scale at the same time that, yeah, people are waking up. And as much as social media has many, many pitfalls, it's also one of the blessings of it is that people are educating each other very rapidly and peer-to-peer,
Yeah.
Of course, you have the algorithm in the way, but if you're aware of that and careful, I think that's the scariest part, is that, a lot of times people don't realize how much the algorithm is curating their experience. But that said, people are teaching and learning and diving in and understanding and questioning on like a completely unprecedented scale.
Yeah.
So it's all happening, and there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and I think it's going to be a very challenging road ahead. And I guess that's where one's own practices, whatever they are, just are so important. Staying as healthy as we can, as strong as we can, as resilient as we can, as find as much, inner groundedness and peace as we can is like critical. It's kind of not optional anymore if you want to navigate all of this with any semblance of sanity, really, and well-being,
Yeah, and I think it's also just figuring out, like, being. I don't know. I mean, I find life is quite a funny thing, really. I remember at work sometimes people used to say to me, "Oh, you don't get stressed about certain things. Why is this not stressing you out?" And I used to look at them and I just say, "We're on a rock hurtling through space, and we have no idea why we're here." Like, I'm so much more worried about that. It plays on my mind constantly.
Yeah. Oh, that's
not
good.
Disinterest, it's distraction. But I mean, I think about that a lot. I have ever since being a child. I was just thinking, what is the point of this? Like, why are we here? And you try and make sense of it and then be like, okay, well, how do I use my time most effectively? And I guess the conclusion I've come to, it's a working hypothesis, I'd call it, is maybe not a conclusion, but we're here to process something and go through a certain journey. And the point of it is to go through that, through your relationships with other people, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with the world, whatever experiences. And I have to believe to some extent that we've chosen to have this.
Yeah. It sure makes it a little easier to just do that. I'm like, well, I don't really know the answer, but I'm going to believe there's a reason and a purpose. I'm going to believe it's up to me to figure out that purpose, in connection with grace, higher power, wisdom, and I'm going to believe that I chose it, because it certainly just feels more empowering to believe that than to believe, that you've been thrust into all these struggles and have zero choice. And at the very least, even if I didn't choose it, I do have a choice as to how to respond here and now. So I'm going to definitely make use of that, because I don't like the feeling of just being buffeted about in the wind, or
Yeah, definitely.
So
well, Keysa, it's been amazing talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. I'm gonna probably text you for the names of the books again, because I was just so listening and present, I didn't write them down.
Oh, no worries. But, yeah, same.
Yeah,
actually, I was going to ask you that, just to top off. So when is your article published on StackChain, and what books would you recommend that people read for NVC if anyone's interested in going down that rabbit hole?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life is the name of what I would recommend completely as the main book. It was like the original book that Marshall wrote. There's many others that are all great, but I would definitely start with that one. And it's really easy reading, because he talks a lot of personal experiences or a lot of stories. I mean, just to say real briefly, like one time, because it's very relevant now, one time he sat with a bunch of Israelis and Palestinians in a room, and it was an incredibly difficult time, but the result was so beautiful. And he did that with many different groups. He did it with the Hutu. Sorry, I can't remember the name.
Tribes. Tutsis and Hutus, in Rwanda.
Yeah. So he put himself. So he describes some really powerful experiences. And when you just keep bringing people back to what the feelings and needs, and then eventually you can get to the requests, the level of connection, forgiveness, compassion, love that fills the space is absolutely profound and undeniable. So the book is wonderful. It has lots of stories and experiences and so on. So it's easy to read. And there's a workbook. It's just called the Nonviolent Communication Workbook by Lucy Liu, Leu. And that's a fantastic companion book. She just created fantastic exercises to go with each chapter of his book. So if one really actually wants to really learn this work and embody it, I would recommend the workbook. And then the article will come out in the next Stack Chain magazine, which is either November 5th or November 25th. I'm not sure which. I've heard both. So it'll be coming out in November, and the Stack Chain, as you know, they've got their printed copies, but those are quite limited. They also have everything online. So the article will be there. And then once they publish that, I'll publish a much longer form of the article on my website because I had to bring it down to 2,000 words for the magazine. Well, I didn't have to, but that was sort of the request. So I did my best to fulfill that.
Yeah.
And but as you could tell from our conversation, there's so much more to say. So I'm going to have a more in-depth article on my website after.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. And the website, just for anyone who's listening, is thesimplestbitcoinbook.net. So they can get your book there, and then presumably the longer version of the article from there as well.
Yeah, that will be later in November.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's lovely to connect with you. Hopefully at some point I meet you in real life. I'm sure I will.
Yeah. But, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, and thank you for the work you're doing. I mean, it's just really profound and beautiful. And I'm just so happy that you're here and just charging it. Really, really incredible.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, I think I've got lots to reflect on after our conversation, though, because I can be quite acerbic over Twitter. So I was listening, I was thinking to myself, "Oh my God, okay, right, might have to reflect on this for a minute." I have some stuff to take away and work on, I think.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, and only if it brings you joy. It's like whatever works. Everyone just
progress. I think progress is necessary, isn't it? I mean, I to be honest, every year that goes by of my life, I look back on the prior one and I go, God, I was such a dick.
Oh, everybody's got their style though too. If people can feel, sometimes, there's people that just like they roll a certain way, but people like with you, I just feel like your love and your intention and your care. So that's what shines through for me.
Oh, thank you.
And so, yeah, I really do. It's like, I guess I just want to be clear that I'm not out here in any way like expecting or thinking that people should do any cookie cutter version of anything. Just be authentic and make sure, that you do what really works for you. And then if something's not working, maybe look at it and be like, well, maybe I could have done that different.
When you start seeing my tweets when somebody's being angry on Twitter, and I'm like, what need of yours is not being met right now?
Well, yeah, and do that part in your mind. Oh yeah, I'll be thinking, yeah. I'll just DM you. Hey, Krista. Oh, that's funny.
That'd be hilarious. Imagine the tone just changes overnight. All of a sudden, I'm like, I feel like you might be dealing with something. What's the need? Rage or flow back.
Yeah, and I don't just for the books. I don't recommend actually like using NVC so much, like in the way you're describing, for at least 6 months, the first 6 months, because we tend to be what we call baby giraffes, and we can come across sounding all kinds of ways that piss people off. Like psychobabble, psychoanalyzing, like whatever it is, It's very interesting. Yeah, it's actually a whole part of the work where I learned over the years that I need to really tell people, don't go home and try this. Do not go home and try this. Go home and write in your journal or talk to yourself, but just like to everybody else, be the same. You can say in your mind, I wonder what they're needing right now. And that alone will change the energy field between you.
Yeah.
Actually. But yeah, anyway, that's just a little caveat disclaimer thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day. And this one will probably go out, I think, next Monday. So whatever it is in 5 days' time. So I'll put that out and I'll put all the links in and everything.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Amazing.
Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time. I think we've rattled on for about an hour and a half. So
yeah, really. I know. I figure if someone's bored, they can switch it off. Everybody's always a choice.
Well, it's been great. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day. Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.